Let's do two simple examples of issuing bonds at a discount. If interest rates go up, bond prices go down because bond buyers need to earn that new higher rate of interest. That is the market rate. So for example, if we print up a $100,000 bond with a 6% interest rate and we have just one payment due 1 year from now for interest and principal, that's $106,000. But before we can sell the bond, interest rates spike up 100 basis points to 7%. We're going to have to sell those bonds at a discount to get them sold. I mean, if somebody paid us $100,000 today and received $106,000 a year from now, we can use Excel's IRR calculation, internal rate of return, to confirm that that represents a 6% return. Who would want a 6% return when the market rate is 7%? If, however, we put the bonds on sale and sell them for only $99,065, that will represent a 7% return to our investor. In other words, they spend only $99,065 today. They still collect that $106,000 a year from now, and we can use Excel's IRR calculation to prove that that represents a 7% return. Okay, the difference between that $100,000 and the $99,065 we actually get when we issue the bonds is called the discount on bonds. So let's book the sale of the bonds. Let's say we sell them on January 1st, 2014. We only got $99,065, but we owe $100,000 at the end. So we debit cash for $99,065, and we credit bonds on bonds payable for $100,000. The difference, the $935 debit, is a discount on bonds. Discount on bonds has a debit balance. Interest expense has a debit balance. So what we're going to do is turn that discount on bonds into interest expense. So let's go ahead and make that final payment a year from now on those bonds. Cash is going to go down by $106,000. That's the $100,000 plus 6% interest. Bonds payable is going to go off our books. They were on there for a $100,000 credit balance, so we debit them for $100,000. We'll take that discount on bonds, which had a debit balance. We got to zero it out, so we're going to credit discount on bonds for $935, and our total interest expense is $6,935. Not just the $6,000 check that we wrote, but a little bit higher because we paid interest expense as if we borrowed $100,000, but we only got $99,065 at the beginning. Of course, in real life, we don't just have one interest payment. We have several, and what we'll do is we'll amortize that discount on bonds each time we make an interest payment. And if we're using the straight line method, it's really simple arithmetic. So let's do a little bit more complicated example. Suppose your company borrows $1 million in the form of 12% bonds due in 20 years. Bonds usually pay interest semi-annually. But suppose you print the 12% bonds, and right before you go to sell them, interest rates shoot up 41 basis points. In other words, investors require a 12.41% return. So to sell our bonds, we have to put them on sale. We have to sell them at a discount. We're going to pay interest as if we borrowed the full $1 million, but we only received $970,000. So our effective interest rate is going to be higher than that 12% that it says on the face of the bonds. Every time we pay interest in cash, we're going to increase our debit to interest expense to reflect that fact, and the offsetting credit is going to be to amortize that bond discount. So let's go ahead and book the sale of those bonds. What's happening to cash? Cash is going up, so we're going to debit cash. $970,000. We owe them $1 million at the end of the day when the bonds are due 20 years from now. The difference between that $970,000 and the $1 million is the discount on bonds. Discount on bonds has a debit balance. Interest expense has a debit balance. So we're slowly going to turn that discount on bonds into interest expense. For step 2, calculate the first interest payment due. Well, if it's $1 million times 12% is $120,000. But since bonds usually pay interest twice a year, we only have to pay half of that. In other words, we only have to pay $60,000 in cash. We're going to take this $30,000 worth of discount on bonds and amortize it, or turn it into interest expense over 40 payments. 20 years times 2 is 40. So we're going to take that $30,000 and we're going to divide it by 40 and discover that we're going to amortize it for $750 every time we make a bond payment. So let's make that first bond interest payment. What's happening to cash? It's going down by $60,000. So we credit cash for $60,000. We decided that that discount on bonds is going to get amortized, in other words, used up $750 every time we make a payment. So our interest expense is a debit of $60,750. Not just the $60,000 check we write, but the check we write plus the amortization of the discount on bonds to give us total interest expense not of $60,000 but of $60,750. We are paying interest as if we borrowed the full $1 million, but we only got the use of $970,000. So our interest expense should be more than $60,000 every 6 months. All right, I hope that helps you understand discount on bonds.